Hello everyone, StealthyShiroean here, and today I'm bringing you my review of Road 96. Road 96 was developed by the French studio Digixart and published by them with the help of Ravenscourt in August 2021. For any Humble Choice subscribers, you would have received this game in the August 2023 bundle. It's a narrative-heavy adventure game that focuses on a teen, or rather teens, going on a road trip with the intent of fleeing the fictional country of Petria. Along the way, they meet a slew of eccentric characters, all with their own backgrounds and story arcs. It advertises itself as a procedurally generated game, and while that's true, I think the Steam page is a bit misleading. However, that doesn't necessarily make it a bad game. In the presentation department, I think it does a fairly good job. The graphics have a pretty aesthetic, with several varied environments, and do a good job to make it feel like a road trip with a variety of different stops. The one negative I have with the graphics would be the animations and facial reactions of the characters. Everything felt a bit stiff and robotic to me. It did what it needed to do to set the stage for emotional impact, creating tension, etc., but I think if it had been just a bit better, then it would really help for a more immersive story. However, the voice acting in the game is excellent. Each voice actor did a great job bringing their characters to life. I did find it a little odd that there was a wide mix of voice actors with various English accents, American, British, or otherwise, but maybe Petria is just a really large country with an abundant immigrant population. Basically, it's really a non-issue, but just something that stood out to me. Finally, the soundtrack here is excellent, and the developers know this. As you travel through the game, you collect cassette tapes that feature each of the great tracks made for the game. Road 96 expertly uses music to set the tone of each scene to great effect, and I definitely see this being a soundtrack I listen to outside the game.
Thinking I could find a friend, saying hi and shaking hands. I hope this moment never ends. It feels so good out on the road and on my own, waking up, no strings attached, no looking back from ocean waves to desert skies.
Given all the hostility, it's normal the police...
The story in Road 96 is the primary focus as to why you'd play this game, and luckily, I could say it's pretty decent. The game takes place in the aforementioned country of Petria, a fictional totalitarian state ruled by President Tyrak, and that president part is in air quotes that you can't see. It also takes place in the summer of 1996, but as a child of the 90s, I didn't feel I could relate or reminisce all that much playing the game. To me, it felt more like something trying to capture the 80s, but maybe I'm misremembering stuff. I think the only thing that really screamed 90s to me were the Walkmans and cassette tapes. But anyway, the whole story suggests there are problems in the system. Tyrak, as many dictators go, has had a rule that's been way too long and much of the system is corrupt. Therefore, things don't seem to be getting done to take care of people, and any who aren't within Tyrak's purview, or are rich, seem to get lost in the cracks. For some reason, Tyrak seems to have it out for teenagers the most. Although, I suspect it's because the game is told through the perspective of different teenagers, and the interactions with said teens are the ones that emphasize the issues with the system the most. That being said, I was a little confused. Apparently, things are going so bad for teens because if they rebel against the system and try to flee the country, then they're thrown into labor camps, known as the Iron Pits. However, I was not sure why this was the case. All I knew is that things were bad for teens and I was supposed to accept this fact. I think the rest of the story is good enough to escape this light world building though, and that's because the story here really comes down to the characters you meet and your interactions with them. Learning about each character was a treat, and each of them were written with varying personalities and backstory. No character felt similar to the next, at least where the main cast is concerned. Some of these characters had hilarious moments, while others made you feel for them, whether good or bad, and others just incited pure terror. And a note on the ending, no spoilers or anything, but I wanted to comment on the different endings. Whatever ending the player gets is determined on a number of variables based off the player's choices. And that sounds great on paper, as it makes it sound like there are wildly different endings the player can get. But temper your expectations here. I think most people will play this game once and then see the ending they got, and if they played it a second time, then the changes would be minimal. It might be one thing that happened that didn't happen previously, but it overall does not drastically change the narrative, or not enough to warrant a new playthrough. Gameplay here is relatively minimal as the story and character interactions take the center stage. Players take the role of different teenagers all trying to make their way to the border and escape Petria, but not all of them make it along the way. When one of them makes it, or their journey is cut short, the episode ends and a new one starts with a new faceless and unnamed character. The main character of this game isn't really the player, as their characters have no real background or story other than the journey they're on. While this may seem like a missed opportunity, the story isn't really about them but the people that they meet. Every stop along the road expends energy, and with each area the player can choose to spend money, usually to regain spent energy. Management of these resources wasn't that difficult, and as you continue on in your journey, they become a non-issue. Some interactions with characters can unlock special abilities that persist from episode to episode, opening up other interactions, such as being able to pick locks or having a higher chance of success with the various dialogue options. The gameplay loop Road 96 has players follow is to come to a new area, explore it, and complete the interaction with the named character, then leave the area via a mode of transportation, and complete the character interaction with that before doing it again. Each of these areas are fairly small, and while some are distinct, there were several that felt really similar. In these areas, you meet one of the characters being Alex, a boy genius, Zoe, a runaway teen like you, Jared, a deranged taxi driver, Stan and Mitch, two brothers in crime, John, a truck driver, Fanny, a cop, and Sonia, the news host celebrity. As said earlier, these characters are the real star of the game. In each event, players learn more about these characters and have to resolve some problem or another before moving on. Almost all of these interactions were more than just a simple discussion with said character, and created interesting and memorable moments throughout the game. Some of these ranged from a game of soccer followed by a heartfelt talk, to a high-speed chase across the highway, to a tense interaction of picking up a psychopath along the road. The game does an excellent job to make players feel certain emotions along their trip. One thing I found rather interesting with interacting with these characters is because each episode follows a different teenager. In the beginning, I was torn between trying to roleplay my teenager with what little roleplaying there actually is, and using the information on the said named character I had learned from a different run. I'm fairly certain the latter option was what the creators intended. As I continued through the game, I knew how to approach each dialogue a lot better because of past interactions. I did think this created some unbelievable moments, like saying something that should be kept secret, only because I know the character won't have a problem with it. While I do believe the choices made with the characters impact the story, at least in the moment, the ending is determined by 3 different variables. In the game, there is an upcoming election with a candidate that promises to change the way things are run. Then there's a rebellion group, or terrorist group, depending on how you want to see them, known as the Brigade. They're hell-bent on making sure to disrupt things and bring down Tyrak. And as the protagonist, you could influence the story in different ways as to how you change the face of the country. This boils down to rebel against authority, being proactive with voting for change, or say, to heck with it all. Many of the choices and interactions tip the scale towards one of these 3 things, and by the end, it's these scores that determine how the ending plays out. Perhaps some of the ways in which you interact with the characters might change some things, but it's largely these 3 values. There are several different scenes within the ending that play out differently based on the choices, but I'd say the ending will feel very similar with some slight changes, like a character dying versus not. To some this may seem like a huge difference, but I guess I expected something a little different from a supposed procedurally generated story. However, that's not exactly what they call it. Instead, they say it's a procedurally generated road trip. Personally, I feel it's a little bit misleading, but they aren't really lying. The road trip is different in the sense that the events can happen in different orders, but only to a certain extent. For instance, Zoe's event for that episode can happen before Jared's, but Zoe's event for episode 2 can't happen in episode 1. And they can occur in slightly different areas. But that's really about it. The story will play out roughly the same. Actually, I thought the pacing of the game wasn't as great as it could have been because of this. In the beginning of the game, every event you encounter will be for a specific character. However, in order to reach the end of the game, you have to get 6 teenagers to the border. So the game can extend further than 6 episodes, but you'll eventually run out of character scenes. What the developers did to pad out the end is have random locations that are actually the same location, just with a slightly different backdrop. I saw Biggie's Diner a lot, and even the interior was roughly the exact same, with the exact same puzzles to do. This really dragged the ending of the game down for me. I felt these placeholder scenes would have been better if they had more of them, and if they were inserted sooner rather than being all dumped in the end. It would have made the pacing a lot better and still hold something exciting for the player to do near the end. One last thing about the ending. No spoilers again, but I understand if you want to skip to the next section. Anyway, I didn't care for the lack of player agency in the end. Most of the ending was watching scenes play out without any choices and barely any interjections of dialogue. It felt more like a bubbling over of everything up to that point, all spilling out, that didn't really matter if the player was there or not. This felt off to me when everything up until this point was all about making choices. And when the ending finally does give you a choice, I was a little surprised that one of the choices really did negate the player interaction in the final scene. And that brings us to the value of the game. Road 96 runs for $19.96 USD at normal retail price. Hey, see what you did there. And I put about 10 hours into my playthrough. I think for a small narrative indie game, this seems to be on par. Although, as said earlier, I felt the marketing was a bit misleading. The game is definitely a joy the ride getting there rather than having a truly different experience every time. The only reason why I would see anyone replaying the game is because they want to get all of the achievements, or they just want to replay it for the story, like rereading a good book. I really did like my experience with the game, and would recommend playing it. However, because of the aforementioned issues, I'd say this game would be something to get on a sale. It's definitely a game worth playing for the character interactions alone, though. And those are my thoughts on Road 96. If you played the game, let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and if you haven't, then let me know if this sounds like something you'd be interested in, or if you have any questions. I hope this video helped you in some small way, and if it did, then please consider leaving a like, comment, subscribe, or whatever it is you feel like doing. Thanks for watching, and have a nice day.